Natasha stared at the bottle of whiskey sitting on her kitchen counter, its amber liquid catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through her window. The expensive label meant nothing to her. She barely drank alcohol, and Robert knew this. Yet here it was, his birthday gift to her, wrapped in shiny paper with a bow that looked more like an afterthought than genuine care. "Happy birthday, baby," Robert had said that morning, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I thought you might want to try something new." Something new. After 12 years of marriage, he should have known that whiskey wasn't her thing. She preferred wine on special occasions, and even then just a glass or two. But Robert had seemed almost eager for her to open it, hovering nearby as she unwrapped the gift, his hands fidgeting with his car keys. The whole morning felt wrong. Robert had been acting strange for weeks now, coming home late, taking phone calls in the garage, and checking his phone constantly during dinner. When she asked about it, he always had an excuse. Work stress, he said. New clients demanding attention. But Natasha wasn't stupid. She'd been married to him long enough to know when he was lying. She picked up the bottle and read the label again. Macallan 25-year-old single malt. The kind of whiskey that cost more than their monthly grocery budget. Where did Robert get the money for something this expensive? Their finances had been tight lately, especially after he'd taken that pay cut at the insurance company 6 months ago. "I'll save it for a special occasion," she had told him when he seemed disappointed that she didn't want to open it right away. "Why not tonight?" Robert had pressed. "It's your birthday. What's more special than that?" But something in his tone made her uncomfortable. The way he kept glancing at the bottle, then at her, then back at the bottle. Like he was waiting for something to happen. Like he was watching her for a reaction she wasn't giving him. Now, hours later, the bottle still sat unopened. Robert had left for work with another one of his mysterious phone calls, speaking in hushed tones in the hallway. She'd heard him say tonight, and as planned, before the front door slammed shut. Natasha walked to her living room and sank into her favorite armchair, the one Robert always complained was too small for both of them. She thought about their marriage, about how different things had been when they first met. Robert used to bring her flowers just because it was Tuesday. He used to listen when she talked about her day at the marketing firm. He used to look at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. When did that change? When did he start looking at her like she was in his way? The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Helen, Robert's mother-in-law, standing on the porch with a grocery bag in one hand and her purse in the other. "Helen." Natasha opened the door with the first genuine smile she'd felt all day. "What are you doing here?" "I brought you some of those cookies you like," Helen said, stepping inside. At 58, Helen was one of those women who seemed to get more elegant with age. Her silver hair was always perfectly styled, and she had a way of making even grocery store clothes look expensive. The ones with the chocolate chips and pecans. "I know Robert probably forgot your birthday." Natasha laughed despite herself. "He didn't forget. He actually got me something." "Really?" Helen raised an eyebrow. "What did my son-in-law get you?" Natasha led her to the kitchen and pointed at the bottle. "Whiskey." Helen stared at it for a long moment, then looked at Natasha with the same expression she might have used if Robert had given her a pet snake. "Whiskey? You don't drink whiskey." "I know. I told him I'd save it for a special occasion." "Honey, you don't even like the smell of whiskey. Remember last Christmas when Uncle George was here with his bourbon? You couldn't even sit in the same room." That was true. Natasha had always been sensitive to strong alcohol. The smell alone made her feel sick. Why would Robert think she'd want an expensive bottle of something she couldn't even stand to smell? "You know what?" Natasha said suddenly. "Take it. You enjoy a good drink now and then. Consider it an early Christmas gift." Helen's eyes lit up. "Are you sure? This looks expensive." "I'm sure. I'd rather it go to someone who can appreciate it." Helen picked up the bottle and examined the label. "Well, I'll be. This is the good stuff. I haven't had whiskey this nice since your father-in-law passed." "Are you absolutely certain?" "Take it, Helen. Please. It'll just sit here collecting dust otherwise." Helen hugged her. "You're too good to us, Natasha. Too good for Robert, if you ask me." They spent the afternoon baking cookies and talking about Helen's garden, about Natasha's work at the marketing firm, about everything except the growing distance in Natasha's marriage. It felt good to laugh again, to feel like someone actually enjoyed her company. After Helen left, Natasha felt lighter somehow. She made herself a simple dinner and settled in to watch a movie. For the first time in weeks, she didn't spend the evening wondering where Robert was or who he was with. Robert came home just after midnight, creeping through the house like he was trying not to wake her. But Natasha was still awake, reading in bed. "How was work?" she asked as he undressed in the dark. Fine. Long day. You know how it is. His voice sounded strained. Did you enjoy your birthday? It was nice. Helen came over. Robert went still. Helen was here? Yes. She brought cookies. We had a lovely time. Did you? Robert cleared his throat. Did you open that whiskey? Natasha felt that familiar uncomfortable feeling again. Why was he so interested in whether she'd opened the bottle? Actually, I gave it to Helen. You know I don't really drink whiskey and she loves it. She was so excited. The silence that followed was so complete that Natasha could hear her own heartbeat. Robert stood frozen in the middle of their bedroom, his shirt half unbuttoned, staring at her in the dim light from the hallway. You gave it to Helen, he repeated slowly. Yes. She took it home with her this afternoon. I hope you don't mind, but I knew she'd appreciate it more than. You gave it to my mother-in-law. His voice was getting higher now, panicked. Robert, what's wrong? You're scaring me. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and started dialing. What time did she leave? What time did she take the bottle? Around 5, I think. Robert, what's going on? But he was already talking into the phone. Helen? Helen, it's Robert. Are you okay? Did you? Please tell me you didn't open that bottle yet. Natasha could hear Helen's voice on the other end, but couldn't make out the words. Robert's face went completely white. How much did you drink? He asked. When? Helen, listen to me very carefully. You need to call 911 right now. Right now. Tell them you've been poisoned. The phone slipped from Natasha's hands as Robert's words hit her like a physical blow. Poisoned. The whiskey had been poisoned. The birthday gift from her husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her, had been meant to kill her. Robert was still talking frantically into the phone, but his words seemed to come from very far away. Natasha felt like she was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Her husband had tried to murder her. And if she hadn't given that bottle to Helen, if she had been the kind of wife who opened expensive gifts right away, she would be dead now. Or dying like Helen might be dying right now because of a choice Natasha had made. The room spun around her as Robert grabbed his car keys, still shouting into the phone. But all Natasha could think about was Helen's smile when she'd taken the bottle, how excited she'd been about the expensive whiskey, how she'd called it the good stuff. The good stuff that was supposed to kill her. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and fear. Natasha sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands shaking as she watched Robert pace back and forth across the linoleum floor. Every few minutes he would stop and stare at the double doors that led to the emergency room, as if he could will the doctors to come out and give them news. But Natasha wasn't thinking about the doctors. She was thinking about the look on Robert's face when she told him about giving the whiskey to Helen. Not concern. Not worry. Terror. The kind of terror that comes from watching your carefully planned scheme fall apart. Mrs. Coleman? A doctor in blue scrubs approached them. I'm Dr. Martinez. I've been treating Mrs. Helen Patterson. Robert rushed over. How is she? Is she going to be okay? Dr. Martinez glanced between them. She's stable for now. We were able to pump her stomach and start treatment, but I need to ask you some questions. You said on the phone that she was poisoned? The whiskey, Robert said quickly. She drank whiskey that had something wrong with it. What exactly was wrong with it? Dr. Martinez pulled out a notepad. Do you know what substance was used? Robert's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't. How did you know it was poisoned? The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. If you didn't know what was in it, how did you know to tell Mrs. Patterson to come to the emergency room? Natasha watched her husband struggle to find words. She saw the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. And suddenly the pieces clicked into place with a clarity that made her feel sick. He knew it was poisoned, Natasha said quietly, because he put the poison there. Both men turned to stare at her. Dr. Martinez looked confused, but Robert's face went completely pale. Natasha, what are you saying? I'm saying you tried to kill me. Her voice was eerily calm even to her own ears. You gave me that bottle for my birthday knowing it was poisoned. You were surprised when I gave it to Helen instead of drinking it myself. That's why you panicked when I told you. That's crazy. Why would I? Because you want me dead. The words came out matter-of-factly like she was discussing the weather. Because you've been acting strange for months. Because you've been having an affair and you need me out of the way. Dr. Martinez stepped between them. I think I need to call the police. Yes, Natasha said. I think you do. 3 hours later, Natasha sat in a different waiting room while police officers questioned Robert in another room down the hall. Through the thin walls, she could hear his voice getting louder and more desperate as the questions continued. Helen was awake now, groggy but alive. The doctors said she would recover fully, thanks to getting treatment so quickly. But Natasha couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if Helen had decided to wait until the weekend to open the bottle. What would have happened if she had drunk more than just one glass before feeling sick? Mrs. Coleman? Detective Sarah Rodriguez sat down beside her. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I need to ask you some questions about your husband and the events of today. He confessed, didn't he? Detective Rodriguez didn't answer directly. Can you tell me about your marriage? Had your husband been acting differently lately? Natasha thought about the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the way Robert had been looking at her like she was an obstacle instead of his wife. He's been having an affair, she said. I didn't have proof, but I knew. A wife always knows. Did he ever threaten you? Ever say anything that made you think he might hurt you? No. Never directly. But... Natasha paused, remembering. He's been asking about my life insurance policy lately. Asking if it was up to date, if the beneficiary information was correct. I thought he was just being responsible. Detective Rodriguez made notes. What can you tell me about the whiskey? Had your husband ever given you alcohol before? Never. He knows I don't drink much and I hate the smell of whiskey. That's why it was so strange. Natasha looked down at her hands. He seemed almost eager for me to drink it. He kept asking why I didn't want to open it right away. And you gave it to Mrs. Patterson instead? She's always been kind to me. Kinder than my own family, really. She deserved something nice. Natasha's voice broke slightly. I almost killed her with my kindness. No, Detective Rodriguez said firmly. Your husband almost killed her with his greed. You saved your own life by trusting your instincts. A commotion in the hallway made them both turn. Through the window, Natasha could see Robert being led away in handcuffs. His face was red and tear-streaked, and he kept looking back toward her waiting room. He confessed, Detective Rodriguez said quietly. Full confession. He's been planning this for 3 months. 3 months. Natasha felt numb. For 3 months, her husband had been planning to murder her. For 3 months, she had been sleeping next to a man who wanted her dead. There's more, the detective continued. He wasn't working alone. Even though Natasha had suspected it, hearing it confirmed felt like another blow. His affair partner, Crystal Williams. His secretary at the insurance company. They had it all planned out. Make it look like an accident, collect the insurance money, and start over somewhere else. Crystal. Natasha remembered her from the company Christmas parties, a young woman with long blonde hair and a laugh that was just a little too loud. She had always been friendly to Natasha, asking about her work, complimenting her dress. All while planning to help murder her. What happens now? Natasha asked. Now you get to decide what kind of life you want to build without him. That night, Natasha sat in her empty house, staring at the spot where the whiskey bottle had been. The silence felt different now. Not lonely but peaceful. For the first time in months, she didn't have to wonder where Robert was or who he was with. She didn't have to wonder if the man sleeping next to her wanted her dead. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Helen. Thank you for saving my life today. And your own. You're stronger than you know. Natasha smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. Helen was right. She was stronger than she knew. And now she was going to prove it. The next morning brought reporters to Natasha's front door and a stack of messages on her phone. Word had gotten out about the attempted murder, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about the woman whose husband had tried to kill her with poisoned whiskey. Natasha ignored the reporters and focused on the messages. Most were from friends and co-workers expressing shock and support. But one message caught her attention. It was from Patricia, Robert's boss at the insurance company. Natasha, I'm so sorry about what happened. I had no idea what Robert and Crystal were planning. Crystal didn't come to work today and we found some disturbing things in her desk. Can you call me? Crystal. The other woman. The one who had helped plan her murder. Natasha dressed carefully in her best business suit and drove to Robert's office. She needed to see this woman face to face. She needed to understand how someone could smile at her at Christmas parties while planning to help kill her. The insurance office was buzzing with whispers when Natasha walked in. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as employees stared at her. She ignored them and walked straight to Patricia's office. Natasha. Patricia stood up quickly, her face full of concern. How are you holding up? I can't believe Robert would do something like this. I need to see Crystal's desk, Natasha said without preamble. I need to understand what they were planning. Patricia hesitated. The police already took most of the evidence, but... She glanced around nervously. Crystal cleaned out her desk yesterday afternoon, right after Robert was arrested. She left this behind. She handed Natasha a small notebook with a flowery cover. The kind of journal a teenage girl might keep. Natasha opened it and felt sick. The first entry was dated 6 months ago. R says his wife is getting suspicious about us. Maybe it's time to speed up our timeline. Another entry from 4 months ago. Found out about the life insurance policy. $500,000. More than enough for us to start over in California. And then, 3 months ago, R found a way to get the poison. Says it will look like a heart attack. Natural causes. No one will suspect anything. Page after page detailed their affair, their plans, and their complete lack of concern for Natasha's life. Crystal had written about Natasha like she was an inconvenience to be removed, not a human being with feelings and dreams. She wrote about me like I was already dead, Natasha said quietly. I'm so sorry, Patricia said. I should have seen the signs. They were working late together a lot, taking lunch breaks at the same time. But I never thought. Where is she now? I don't know. She didn't show up for work today, and her apartment manager said she moved out yesterday. Just packed up and left. Natasha closed the journal. Crystal was running. Probably scared that Robert would implicate her to get a lighter sentence. But running wouldn't help her. The police would find her eventually. There's something else, Patricia said reluctantly. Crystal's family has been calling all morning. Her mother, her sister. They had no idea about any of this. They're devastated. Good, Natasha thought. Let them be devastated. Let them understand what it felt like to discover that someone they loved was capable of murder. But as she drove home, Natasha realized that revenge wouldn't be enough. Robert was going to prison and Crystal was on the run, but that didn't fix the damage they had done. It didn't give Natasha back the 12 years she had wasted on a marriage built on lies. She needed to do more than just see them punished. She needed to rebuild her life completely. That afternoon, Helen came over with more cookies and a bottle of wine. I figured we both needed a drink after yesterday, she said. Though I'm sticking to wine from now on. They sat in Natasha's living room, and for the first time, Natasha told someone the whole truth about her marriage. How distant Robert had become, how she had suspected the affair but hadn't wanted to confront it, how she had felt like a stranger in her own home for months. I feel stupid, Natasha admitted. I should have known. I should have done something sooner. Honey, you can't blame yourself for trusting your husband. That's what marriage is supposed to be about. Helen patted her hand. The question is, what are you going to do now? I don't know. Everything we built together, the house, the bank accounts, the life insurance, it's all mixed up with his. I don't even know how to separate my life from his. Helen was quiet for a moment. You know, when my husband died, I thought my life was over. We had been together for 30 years and suddenly I was alone. But you know what I discovered? I was stronger without him than I ever was with him. Robert isn't dead. He's just in jail. Same difference really. The man you married, the man you thought you knew, he never existed. The real Robert is the one who tried to kill you for insurance money. So mourn the fake husband if you need to, but don't waste any more time on the real one. That night, Natasha made a list of everything she needed to do. Cancel joint credit cards. Change bank account passwords. Meet with a divorce lawyer. Start over completely. But as she wrote, she realized she didn't just want to start over. She wanted to win. She wanted Robert and Crystal to lose everything they had planned to gain from her death. She wanted revenge. And she was going to get it. 3 days after Robert's arrest, Natasha visited him in jail. She wore the blue dress he had always said was his favorite, styled her hair the way he liked it, and put on the smile she had perfected over 12 years of marriage. Robert looked terrible. His usual neat appearance was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit and tired eyes. When he saw her, he started crying. Natasha, thank God you came. I've been going crazy in here. I need to explain. Shoo, she said softly, reaching across the table to take his hands. I know you're sorry. I know you didn't mean for Helen to get hurt. Robert's eyes widened with hope. You believe me? I've had time to think about it. You were probably planning to surprise me with something and it went wrong somehow. Maybe the bottle got contaminated at the store, or maybe someone at work was playing a prank that got out of hand. It was all lies, of course. But Robert desperately wanted to believe her, and desperate people weren't very smart. Yes, he said eagerly. That's exactly what happened. I would never hurt you, baby. You have to know that. I do know that, Natasha lied. And I'm going to help you prove it. I've hired the best lawyer I could find. We're going to fight these charges together. Robert started crying again, this time from relief. I knew you'd stand by me. Crystal said you would probably leave me, but I told her you weren't that kind of person. Crystal. There it was. Even now, sitting in jail for attempted murder, he was still thinking about his mistress. Crystal was probably just scared, Natasha said gently. Speaking of which, do you know where she is? The police want to question her as a witness. She's staying at her sister's place in Atlanta. She's scared the police will try to blame her for something she didn't do. Natasha nodded sympathetically while memorizing every word. Atlanta. Sister's place. Crystal thought she was safe. Don't worry about Crystal right now, Natasha said. Focus on getting out of here. I'm going to take care of everything. Over the next 2 weeks, Natasha played the role of the devoted wife perfectly. She visited Robert every few days, bringing him his favorite snacks and telling him about her efforts to clear his name. She met with his lawyer, a public defender who seemed more interested in plea bargains than fighting the charges. But behind the scenes she was working on something else entirely. Helen had offered to help with anything Natasha needed, and Natasha had a very specific need. She needed to know everything about Robert's finances, his plans with Crystal, and exactly how they had intended to disappear after collecting the insurance money. I still have keys to Robert's office, Helen said when Natasha explained what she needed. Patricia gave them to me when she heard about the arrest. She thought you might need to collect his personal items. That weekend, Natasha and Helen drove to the insurance office after hours. The building was empty, the parking lot dark except for a few security lights. Helen's hands shook as she unlocked the front door. I feel like a criminal, Helen whispered. We're not stealing anything, Natasha replied. We're just looking for the truth. Robert's office was exactly as he had left it: messy desk, family photos that now seemed like mockeries, and a computer that wasn't password protected. Natasha sat down and started searching through his files. What she found was worse than she had imagined. Robert hadn't just been planning to kill her. He had been stealing money from the insurance company for months, skimming small amounts from client payments and hiding them in secret accounts. He had forged documents, lied to customers, and put dozens of people's policies at risk. Look at this, Natasha said, showing Helen a spreadsheet on Robert's computer. He's been planning this for almost a year. The affair with Crystal was just the beginning. In another folder, she found email exchanges between Robert and Crystal. They had planned everything down to the smallest detail: how to make the poison look like natural causes, how to collect the insurance money without suspicion, where to go once they had the money. But the most damning evidence was in Crystal's desk, which they searched next. Hidden in the back of her filing cabinet was a burner phone with text messages that made Natasha's blood run cold. Can't wait to be free of her, Crystal had texted Robert just 2 weeks ago. After Saturday, we'll never have to think about your boring wife again. Robert had replied, soon, baby. Soon she'll be out of our lives forever. Natasha copied everything onto a flash drive and took pictures of the most incriminating documents. But she didn't turn them over to the police. Not yet. First, she had some other preparations to make. On Monday morning, she called her own insurance company and increased her life insurance policy to $1 million. When they asked why, she explained that her husband was facing criminal charges and she wanted to make sure she was protected financially. Then she called a private investigator and hired him to track down Crystal in Atlanta. Finally, she opened a new bank account in her name only and started transferring money from the joint accounts she shared with Robert. Not all of it. She didn't want to look suspicious, but enough to give her options. When she visited Robert that week, she had more good news to share. The insurance company agreed to increase my policy, she told him. I explained that we might have legal expenses and they were very understanding. Robert's eyes lit up. Even facing murder charges, he was still thinking about insurance money. That's great, baby. That's really smart thinking. I also found some things in your office that might help with your case, she said, watching his face carefully. Some files that show you've been working really hard lately. Maybe too hard. The stress might explain why you made some poor decisions. Robert nodded eagerly. Yeah, work has been really stressful. Maybe that's part of what happened. Natasha smiled and squeezed his hand. Don't worry. I'm going to take care of everything. Crystal too. I'm going to make sure she doesn't get in any trouble for being associated with this mess. You do that? Even after everything? Of course. I know how much she means to you as a friend and coworker. I want to protect everyone I care about. Robert actually teared up at this. I don't deserve you, Natasha. I really don't. On that, at least they could agree. The private investigator found Crystal in less than a week. She was staying with her sister in a suburb outside Atlanta, working at a coffee shop under her maiden name and apparently planning to stay hidden indefinitely. Natasha drove to Atlanta on a Saturday morning, telling Robert she was visiting her own sister. She found the coffee shop easily a small place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Crystal was working behind the counter, her blonde hair now dyed brown and cut short. She looked different without her usual makeup and professional clothes, but Natasha would have recognized her anywhere. This was the woman who had helped plan her murder. Natasha ordered a coffee and sat at a table in the corner, watching Crystal work. She seemed nervous, constantly checking the door and jumping every time someone new came in. Good. She should be nervous. After an hour, Crystal's shift ended and she walked outside to her car. Natasha followed. Crystal. The other woman spun around and her face went completely white when she saw Natasha. What are you doing here? Crystal's voice was high and panicked. We need to talk. I don't have anything to say to you. Leave me alone. Crystal tried to get in her car, but Natasha moved to block the door. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. Help? Crystal laughed bitterly. You want to help the woman who tried to kill you? Robert tried to kill me. You were just caught up in his plan. This wasn't true, but Natasha could see Crystal desperately wanted to believe it. The other woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. He told you it was all his idea? Of course it was. You're too smart to plan something like this on your own. Natasha kept her voice gentle and understanding. Robert manipulated you just like he manipulated me. Crystal started crying. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. He said it would look like an accident. He said no one would know. But now people do know, and you're the one hiding while Robert sits in jail taking all the blame. Natasha moved closer. That doesn't seem fair, does it? What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we can help each other. I want my husband back and you want your life back. There might be a way for both of us to get what we want. They talked for another hour in Crystal's car. Natasha spun a story about standing by Robert, about believing the poisoning was an accident, about wanting to clear both their names. She offered to help Crystal return to her old life if Crystal would testify that Robert had acted alone. It was all lies, but Crystal was desperate enough to believe anything that might save her. I have some money saved up, Natasha said finally. Enough to help you start over somewhere new, get a fresh start. But I need to know I can trust you. What do you mean? I mean I need to know you won't run again. I need to know you'll be available if the lawyers need you to testify. Crystal nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. I want to make this right. Good. There's just one thing I need you to do first. Natasha pulled out a contract. She had prepared an agreement for Crystal to invest in a fake business opportunity. It was written in complex legal language that most people wouldn't read carefully, and it required Crystal to put up $5,000 as an investment. What is this? Crystal asked, scanning the document. A friend of mine is starting a business. Marketing consulting. With your background in office management, you'd be perfect as a partner. The $5,000 is just a good faith deposit to show you're serious. Crystal hesitated. I don't have that kind of money. I'll loan it to you, Natasha said smoothly. Consider it part of helping you get back on your feet. You can pay me back once the business starts making money. It took another hour of convincing, but eventually Crystal signed the contract. She gave Natasha her new address and phone number, promised to stay in touch, and agreed to return to their home state within the month. What Crystal didn't know was that the contract she had signed wasn't for a business investment. It was actually a confession document, written in legal language that admitted to her role in planning Robert's attempted murder. By signing it, she had just provided written evidence of her guilt. The drive back home gave Natasha time to think about her next move. She had Crystal's confession, Robert's trust, and access to all their financial information. Now she needed to start dismantling the life they had planned to build on her death. That night, she called Helen to update her on the plan. Are you sure about this? Helen asked. Playing games with these people seems dangerous. They played games with my life, Natasha replied. They planned to kill me and take my money. Now they're going to lose everything instead. What's the next step? Now I make sure Robert signs away everything he owns. And then I make sure the whole world knows exactly what kind of people they really are. The following week, Natasha visited Robert with a new set of papers. She told him they were legal documents to protect their assets while he fought the charges. My lawyer says we need to put everything in my name temporarily, she explained. That way if there are any civil lawsuits, they can't touch our house or savings. Robert, desperate and trusting, signed everything without reading it carefully. He signed over the house, the cars, the bank accounts, and even his share of his pension fund. In his mind, he was protecting their assets. In reality, he was giving Natasha complete control over everything they had built together. "You're so smart, baby," he said as he signed the last document. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," Natasha replied with a smile. But even as she said it, she was already planning exactly how he would find out. 3 weeks after visiting Crystal in Atlanta, Natasha put the next phase of her plan into motion. She had spent the time carefully documenting every piece of evidence she had gathered: Robert's embezzlement, Crystal's confession, and the detailed plans they had made for her murder. But she didn't take this evidence to the police. Instead, she took it to someone who could do much more damage: the local news station. Reporter Jennifer Kane had been covering the attempted murder story since the beginning. She was young, ambitious, and hungry for the kind of exclusive that could make her career. When Natasha called and offered her inside access to the full story, Jennifer jumped at the chance. They met at a coffee shop downtown, far from anywhere Robert's friends or co-workers might see them. "I want people to know the truth," Natasha told Jennifer, sliding a folder across the table. "Not just that my husband tried to kill me, but how he planned to do it and who helped him." Jennifer opened the folder and her eyes widened. Inside were copies of the emails between Robert and Crystal, photos of the financial documents showing Robert's embezzlement, and Crystal's signed confession disguised as a business contract. "This is incredible," Jennifer said, flipping through the pages. "But why bring this to me instead of the police?" "Because the police will just add it to their case file. You'll make sure everyone sees it." Jennifer grinned. "When do you want this to air?" "Tomorrow night. And I want you to interview Crystal too. I'll give you her address." The next evening, Natasha sat in her living room with Helen, watching as their local news station aired the most comprehensive expose of Robert and Crystal's scheme that anyone could have imagined. Jennifer had done her homework, tracking down Crystal in Atlanta and confronting her with the evidence Natasha had provided. The interview with Crystal was devastating. Caught off guard and panicked, Crystal tried to deny everything at first. But when Jennifer showed her the signed confession and read her own emails back to her, Crystal broke down completely. "It was his idea," she sobbed on camera. "Robert planned everything. He said his wife would never find out. He said it would look like an accident." "But you helped him," Jennifer pressed. "You researched the poison, you helped him plan the timeline." "I was in love with him. I thought we were going to be together." The interview showed Crystal for exactly what she was: not a victim of Robert's manipulation, but a willing participant who was now desperate to save herself. But the real bombshell came when Jennifer revealed Robert's embezzlement. She had verified Natasha's evidence with independent sources, and the scope of Robert's theft was staggering. Over 18 months, he had stolen nearly $50,000 from the insurance company. Robert Coleman didn't just try to murder his wife, Jennifer reported. He had been stealing from his employer to fund his affair and his escape plan. According to our investigation, Mr. Coleman planned to collect his wife's life insurance money and flee the country with his mistress, leaving behind a trail of victims and stolen money. The story ran for 15 minutes, an eternity in local news time. It included interviews with some of Robert's clients who had been cheated, with Patricia from the insurance company, and with Helen, who spoke movingly about nearly dying from the poisoned whiskey. But Natasha's favorite part was the end, when Jennifer revealed that Crystal was now facing her own criminal charges based on new evidence that had come to light. "The woman who helped plan this murder is no longer hiding," Jennifer reported. "Thanks to evidence provided by Mrs. Coleman herself, Crystal Williams will be extradited back to face charges as an accessory to attempted murder." Natasha's phone started ringing within minutes of the broadcast ending. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers calling to express their shock and support. But the call she was waiting for came an hour later. "You did this." Robert's voice was cold and angry, completely different from the grateful, loving tone he had used with her for weeks. "You set me up." "I told the truth," Natasha said calmly. "Something you should try sometime. I trusted you. I thought you forgave me. I forgave the husband I thought I knew. But that man never existed, did he? The real Robert Coleman is a thief and a murderer who tried to kill his wife for insurance money. You have no idea what you've done. Crystal could have disappeared. She could have started over. Now her life is ruined." "Good. She tried to kill me. Her life should be ruined." Robert was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was full of venom. You think you're so smart. You think you've won. But you have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, I know exactly what you're capable of. You're capable of murder, theft, and lying to everyone who ever cared about you. But you're not capable of hurting me anymore. Because I'm not the same woman you married. That woman trusted you. This woman doesn't. She hung up the phone and turned to Helen, who had been listening with wide eyes. Do you think he'll try to retaliate somehow? Helen asked. Let him try, Natasha said. I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. He's the one with everything to lose now. And she was right. By the next morning, the insurance company had fired Robert retroactively and was pursuing civil charges to recover the stolen money. The story had been picked up by regional news stations, and Robert's name was being associated with attempted murder and embezzlement across 3 states. Crystal, meanwhile, had been arrested in Atlanta and was fighting extradition. But with her signed confession and the email evidence, her lawyer was already talking about plea bargains. Natasha spent that morning meeting with her divorce lawyer, who informed her that Robert's criminal activities had voided their prenuptial agreement. She would be entitled to everything: the house, the savings, the cars, even Robert's pension. And since she now had control of all their assets thanks to the papers Robert had signed in jail, there was nothing he could do to stop her. It's unusual for someone in your situation to come out ahead financially, the lawyer said. Usually, criminal activity by a spouse creates complications. But you've positioned yourself very well. Positioned herself. As if it had been strategy rather than survival. That afternoon, Natasha drove to the jail for what she knew would be her last visit with Robert. She wore jeans and a t-shirt instead of the dresses he preferred, and she didn't style her hair or put on makeup. She wanted him to see the real her, the woman who had outsmarted him completely. Robert looked terrible. The news coverage had reached the jail, and apparently his fellow inmates weren't kind to men who tried to murder their wives. He had a black eye and a cut on his lip. Come to gloat? He asked when she sat down across from him. Come to say goodbye, she replied. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. On what grounds? I never cheated on you. Natasha laughed. Robert, I have emails between you and Crystal going back 8 months. I have photos of you together. I have hotel receipts. And I have her confession that she was helping you plan my murder because you two were going to run away together. She's lying to save herself. Maybe. But it doesn't matter now, does it? Whether you were cheating or just planning to kill me for money, either way, our marriage is over. Robert leaned forward, and for a moment, Natasha saw something dangerous in his eyes. You think you're going to ride off into the sunset with my money? You think this is some kind of fairy tale where the good wife wins in the end? I think this is a story about a woman who was smart enough to save her own life, Natasha replied. And if that makes me the hero of this story, then yes. I'm going to win in the end. She stood up to leave, but Robert called after her. This isn't over, Natasha. Even if I go to prison, this isn't over between us. Natasha turned back to look at him one last time. Yes, it is. You tried to kill me, Robert. But I'm still here and you're in jail. That's how this story ends. She walked out of the jail and into the sunshine, feeling lighter than she had in years. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she was in control of her own life. And she had plans for that life. Big plans. The courtroom was packed the day Robert's trial began. The attempted murder case had garnered so much media attention that people were lining up hours early just to get a seat. Natasha sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table, where Robert would have to look at her every time he turned around. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a simple black dress that made her look professional and sympathetic. Not the grieving widow because Robert wasn't dead, but the strong survivor who had outsmarted her would-be killer. Robert's new lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named James Morrison who specialized in high-profile criminal cases, had tried everything to get Natasha's evidence thrown out. He argued that she had obtained it illegally, that she had manipulated Crystal into signing the confession, that her entire investigation was tainted by her desire for revenge. But Judge Patricia Williams wasn't buying it. Mrs. Coleman was investigating threats to her own life, the judge ruled during pre-trial hearings. She had every right to gather evidence about a plot to murder her. The confession document, while obtained through deception, was signed voluntarily by Ms. Williams with no coercion. Crystal's trial had been scheduled separately, but her lawyer had already reached out about a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Robert, she would plead guilty to accessory charges and face a reduced sentence. It was the kind of deal that usually meant the prosecution's case was very strong. Prosecutor Maria Santos opened with a statement that laid out the entire conspiracy in devastating detail. She showed the jury emails between Robert and Crystal, financial records proving Robert's embezzlement, and the timeline of their murder plot. Robert Coleman didn't just want his wife dead, Santos told the jury. He wanted her dead so he could steal her life insurance money, run away with his mistress, and leave behind a trail of victims who trusted him. But it was Helen's testimony that really drove the point home. Robert's mother-in-law took the stand on the second day, walking slowly but steadily to the witness chair. At 68 years old, she was a sympathetic figure, the innocent victim who had nearly died because of her son-in-law's greed. He called me that night and told me I'd been poisoned, Helen testified, her voice clear and strong. He didn't ask how I was feeling or if I needed help getting to the hospital. He just wanted to know how much I'd drunk and when. How did that make you feel? Prosecutor Santos asked. Like he was more worried about his plan failing than about whether I was going to live or die. Defense attorney Morrison tried to poke holes in Helen's testimony, suggesting that she might be confused about the timeline or mistaken about Robert's tone of voice. But Helen had survived 68 years by being observant and sharp, and she wasn't easily rattled. "Young man," she said to Morrison during cross-examination, "I may be old, but I'm not deaf and I'm not stupid. I know panic when I hear it, and Robert Coleman was panicked that night. Not worried about me. Panicked about getting caught." The prosecution's case continued for a week, building layer upon layer of evidence. They called Crystal to testify via video link from the Atlanta jail where she was being held pending her own trial. Crystal looked different than she had in the coffee shop where Natasha had confronted her. Prison had stripped away her makeup and professional appearance, leaving behind a young woman who looked scared and defeated. "Robert told me his wife was suspicious," Crystal testified, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said we needed to move up our timeline before she figured out what we were planning." "What exactly were you planning?" Santos asked. "We were going to kill her and take the insurance money. Robert said it would look like a heart attack. Natural causes. No one would investigate too closely." "Whose idea was the poison?" Crystal hesitated, glancing at the camera that was broadcasting her testimony to Robert's courtroom. "It was both of us. Robert found out how to get it, but I researched what kind would work best." Morrison tried to discredit Crystal's testimony, pointing out that she was facing her own criminal charges and had every reason to lie to get a better deal. But Crystal had emails and text messages to back up everything she said, and the jury could see the weight of evidence for themselves. The defense's case was much shorter. Morrison called character witnesses who testified that Robert had always seemed like a good husband and employee. He brought in experts who suggested that the poison might have been contaminated accidentally, that perhaps Robert really had been trying to give his wife a nice gift. But none of it was very convincing, especially when Morrison put Robert on the stand to testify in his own defense. Robert tried to stick to the story he had told Natasha in jail, that the whiskey had been contaminated somehow, that he had never intended to hurt anyone. But under cross-examination, Santos tore his story apart. "Mr. Coleman, if you thought the whiskey might be contaminated, why didn't you call the store where you bought it?" I didn't think of that." "You didn't think to warn other customers who might have bought contaminated alcohol?" "I was focused on my wife." "Were you?" "Because according to phone records, you called Ms. Williams 6 times the night your wife was in the hospital, but you never called your wife to check on her." Robert's face flushed red. "I was confused. I wasn't thinking clearly." "Confused enough to call your mistress 6 times, but not confused enough to check on your poisoned wife?" It went on like this for hours. Santos methodically destroyed every part of Robert's defense, showing the jury a man who was clearly lying about everything. By the time Robert stepped down from the witness stand, even Morrison looked like he knew the case was lost. Closing arguments took place on a Friday afternoon. Morrison did his best to create reasonable doubt, suggesting that the evidence against his client was circumstantial and that Crystal was lying to save herself. But Santos had the last word, and she used it effectively. "Robert Coleman thought he had planned the perfect murder," she told the jury. "He thought he could kill his wife, collect her insurance money, and disappear with his mistress. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. But he made one crucial mistake: he underestimated the woman he was trying to kill. Natasha Coleman saved her own life by trusting her instincts and giving away a gift that felt wrong to her. And then she saved all of us by making sure that Robert Coleman and Crystal Williams faced justice for what they tried to do." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, the foreman stood and delivered the verdict that everyone expected: guilty on all counts. Attempted murder in the first degree. Conspiracy to commit murder. Embezzlement. Fraud. Robert showed no emotion when the verdict was read, But Natasha saw his hands shaking as the bailiff put him in handcuffs. She felt no satisfaction in his defeat, only a sense of completion. This chapter of her life was finally over. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month, but the prosecutor told Natasha privately that Robert was looking at 20 to 25 years in prison. With his embezzlement conviction, he would never be eligible for parole. "He'll be an old man when he gets out," Santos said. If he gets out. Crystal's sentencing had already taken place. She had received 8 years in prison for her role in the conspiracy, with the possibility of parole in 5 years if she maintained good behavior. "Justice," Helen said as they left the courthouse together. Finally. But Natasha knew that justice was only part of what she had been seeking. The other part, revenge, was still ongoing. And she wasn't finished yet. The day after Robert's conviction, Natasha woke up in her house now, legally and completely, and realized she felt different. For months, she had been focused on survival and revenge. Now, for the first time since this nightmare began, she could focus on something else, building a new life. But first, she had some unfinished business to take care of. The insurance company had fired Robert and was pursuing civil charges to recover the money he had stolen. But Natasha had information that could help them recover even more. She knew about secret accounts Robert had hidden, about forged documents he had created, about clients he had cheated in ways the company hadn't discovered yet. She called Patricia and arranged a meeting. "I want to help you find everything Robert stole," she told Patricia in the conference room at the insurance office. "Not because I feel guilty about what he did, but because his victims deserve to get their money back." Patricia looked surprised. "Most spouses in your situation try to distance themselves from their husband's crimes. You're volunteering to help us investigate. Robert hurt a lot of people. I have information that might help you make some of them whole again." Over the next several hours, Natasha walked Patricia and the company's investigators through everything she had discovered about Robert's financial crimes. She showed them bank records she had copied, explained the system he had used to skim money from client payments, and provided contact information for some of the clients who had been cheated. "This is incredibly helpful," Patricia said when they finished. "With this information, we might be able to recover most of what was stolen." Good. These people trusted Robert with their financial security. They shouldn't have to pay for his crimes. But Natasha's cooperation came with a price. She wanted the insurance company to make a public statement about Robert's crimes, detailing exactly how much he had stolen and how many clients he had cheated. She wanted everyone to know the full scope of his betrayal. "The media coverage so far has focused on the attempted murder," she explained. "But people need to know that Robert wasn't just a would-be killer. He was a thief who violated the trust of dozens of families." Patricia agreed, and 2 days later the insurance company held a press conference. They announced that Robert had stolen over $75,000 from the company and its clients over 18 months. They revealed that he had forged documents, lied to customers about their coverage, and put families at financial risk to fund his affair and escape plan. The press conference made national news. Robert Coleman wasn't just a local story anymore, he was becoming a symbol of betrayal and greed that resonated across the country. But Natasha wasn't finished. She had also been working with a victims' rights organization to help some of Robert's clients file civil lawsuits. Even though Robert was in prison and had no money, they could still pursue judgments against him that would follow him for the rest of his life. "He'll never be able to own property or have significant assets again," the lawyer explained to Natasha. "Every penny he ever earns will go to paying back his victims." Crystal, meanwhile, was discovering that prison was just the beginning of her problems. Her family had disowned her after learning about her role in the murder plot. Her college had revoked her degree when they learned she had used her education to help plan a murder. And several of Robert's clients were also suing her, arguing that she had helped him steal their money. Natasha received regular updates about both of them from the prosecutor's office. Robert was having a difficult time in prison. He had been attacked twice by other inmates and was spending most of his time in protective custody. Crystal was serving her time in a minimum security facility, but she had already been denied parole twice due to the severity of her crimes. "They thought they were going to run away together and live happily ever after," Helen observed one afternoon as they worked in Natasha's garden. "Instead, they're both going to spend years in prison thinking about what they lost." "Good," Natasha said, pulling weeds with perhaps more force than necessary. "They deserve to think about it." 6 months after Robert's conviction, Natasha made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She decided to sell the house. "But this is your home," Helen protested. "You've lived here for 12 years. "I've lived here with Robert for 12 years, Natasha corrected. Every room in this house has memories of him in it. Every corner reminds me of the life I thought I had. She contacted a real estate agent and put the house on the market. It sold within 2 weeks for more than she had expected apparently. Being the former home of a would-be murderer made it a curiosity that some people were willing to pay extra for. With the money from the house sale, plus the assets she had legally claimed from Robert, plus the life insurance money she was still entitled to collect if anything happened to her, Natasha found herself in an unusual position for a woman whose husband had tried to kill her. She was financially independent. More than independent. She was wealthy. She used some of the money to help Helen buy a new house in a retirement community with a beautiful garden and friendly neighbors. She donated a significant amount to the victims' rights organization that had helped Robert's clients. And she kept enough to do something she had always dreamed of but never thought she could afford: start her own business. What kind of business? Helen asked when Natasha told her about the plan. Marketing consulting for women-owned businesses, Natasha said. I want to help other women build something that belongs to them alone. It felt like poetry in a way. Robert had tried to kill her to steal her money and start a new life with another woman. Instead, his crimes had given her the money she needed to start over completely without him. But the sweetest revenge came 8 months after Robert's conviction, when Natasha received a letter from the prison where he was serving his sentence. Mrs. Coleman, the letter began. Your husband has asked me to contact you about a divorce settlement. He would like to negotiate the division of assets. Natasha laughed out loud when she read it. Robert still thought he was entitled to something. Even from prison, even after being convicted of trying to murder her, he still believed he deserved half of what they had built together. She wrote back a single line: there are no assets to divide. I own everything now. It was true. Robert had signed everything over to her when he thought she was going to help him fight the charges. Every asset, every account, every investment they had ever made together now belonged to her alone. The lawyer wrote back a few weeks later, informing her that Robert was dropping his request for a settlement. Apparently, someone had finally explained to him that he had no legal right to anything. Natasha kept that letter in her desk drawer as a reminder. Not of Robert or their failed marriage, but of how far she had come from the woman who had almost drunk poison whiskey on her birthday. That woman had trusted too easily and questioned too little. This woman, the one who had outsmarted her would-be killer and rebuilt her life completely, would never make those mistakes again. 2 years after Robert's conviction, Natasha stood in the conference room of her own marketing consulting firm, looking out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Coleman Consulting had grown faster than she had ever imagined possible, with 12 employees and clients across 3 states. She had kept Robert's last name for business purposes, not out of any lingering attachment to him, but because the name Coleman had become associated with survival and strength in the media coverage of her story. Women who had heard about her experience sought her out specifically, wanting to work with someone who understood what it meant to rebuild from nothing. The Patterson account is ready for your review, said Angela, her assistant and office manager. Angela was a young woman who reminded Natasha of herself at that age: smart, ambitious, and determined to prove herself in the business world. Thank you. How did the client meeting go this morning? Very well. Mrs. Rodriguez wants to move forward with the full marketing package for her restaurant. She said she trusts us because we understand what it means to fight for what you want. This was a common refrain among Natasha's clients. Many of them were women who had left bad marriages, started over after financial disasters, or built businesses from nothing. They saw Natasha as someone who understood their struggles, and they were right. The business had been profitable from almost the beginning, but Natasha's success wasn't just financial. She had built something that belonged entirely to her, something that no one could take away or use against her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Helen. Don't forget dinner tonight. I'm making your favorite. Natasha smiled. Helen had become more than just her former mother-in-law. She was family in the truest sense of the word. They had dinner together twice a week, and Helen had even joined the board of Coleman Consulting as an advisor. She has more business sense than most people half her age, Natasha often told people when they asked about having her former mother-in-law involved in her company. The truth was, Helen had been the only family member to stand by her during the trial and its aftermath. Natasha's own parents had been supportive but distant, uncomfortable with the media attention and the violent details of Robert's crimes. Her sister had visited once and then made excuses about being too busy to stay in touch. But Helen had been there for everything: the court hearings, the media interviews, the long nights when Natasha couldn't sleep because she kept thinking about how close she had come to dying. Helen understood what it meant to have your trust shattered by someone you loved, and she never tried to minimize Natasha's pain or rush her healing process. At 5 o'clock, Natasha locked up her office and drove to the small restaurant where she was meeting Dr. Thomas Mitchell for dinner. They had been dating for 6 months now, taking things slowly and carefully. Thomas was everything Robert hadn't been: honest, consistent, and genuinely interested in Natasha as a person rather than as an accessory to his life. He was a family doctor who worked at a community clinic, treating patients who couldn't afford private health care. When Natasha had told him about her past, about Robert and the attempted murder, Thomas had listened without judgment and never made her feel like damaged goods. "How was your day?" he asked when she arrived at the restaurant. Thomas was tall and soft-spoken, with kind eyes and hands that were always gentle when he touched her. "Productive. We signed 3 new clients this week." Natasha settled into the booth across from him. "How was yours?" "Busy. We had a woman come in today who reminded me of you, actually. She's leaving an abusive marriage and starting over with nothing. She was so worried about the cost of healthcare for her kids." "What did you tell her?" "That we'd work something out. That starting over is hard enough without worrying about medical bills." This was one of the things Natasha loved about Thomas. He saw people who were struggling and found ways to help them, just like she did with her business clients. They both understood what it meant to rebuild from nothing. "I have some news," Thomas said as they waited for their food to arrive. "I've been offered a position at the university hospital. It would mean more money and better hours." "That's wonderful. Are you going to take it?" Thomas hesitated. "It would also mean moving to Charlotte. It's only 2 hours away, but we just started dating and you don't know if I'd be willing to consider a long-distance relationship." "Something like that." Natasha thought about it. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have been ready for this conversation. The idea of rearranging her life for a man would have terrified her. But Thomas wasn't asking her to rearrange her life, he was asking if she'd be willing to include him in her plans. "What if I told you I've been thinking about expanding Coleman Consulting? Opening a second office somewhere with a good business climate and reasonable real estate prices?" Thomas grinned. "I'd say Charlotte has an excellent business climate and very reasonable real estate prices." They talked about logistics and timelines, about the possibility of Natasha opening a Charlotte office while keeping her original location running. It would be a big step, both personally and professionally, but Natasha realized she was excited about the challenge. More importantly, she was excited about building something new with someone who respected her independence and success. After dinner, they walked through the downtown area where Natasha's office was located. The streets were busy with people heading to restaurants and bars, couples holding hands, friends laughing together. It was the kind of normal, peaceful life that Natasha had almost lost. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had gone differently?" Thomas asked as they stopped in front of Natasha's office building. "You mean if I had drunk the whiskey?" "Yeah. Or if you hadn't been smart enough to figure out what Robert was planning?" Natasha looked up at the windows of her office, where the lights were still on in the conference room. "I try not to think about it. I can't change what almost happened. I can only control what happens next." "And what happens next?" "Next, I keep building the life I want. I keep helping other women do the same thing. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, I get to share some of that life with someone who makes me laugh and brings me flowers just because it's Tuesday." Thomas had brought her flowers that morning, not expensive roses, but a small bouquet of daisies from the farmer's market. They were sitting on her desk upstairs, bright and cheerful and completely different from the gilt flowers Robert used to bring when he was having an affair. "I love you," Thomas said quietly. It was the first time either of them had said it, and Natasha felt a moment of panic. Not because she didn't feel the same way, but because the last time someone had claimed to love her, they had tried to kill her. But Thomas wasn't Robert. Thomas didn't want to control her or change her or take anything away from her. Thomas loved the strong, independent woman she had become, not some version of her that he wanted to create. "I love you too," she said, and meant it completely. They kissed on the sidewalk in front of her office building, and Natasha realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the desperate, clinging kind of happiness she had felt during her marriage, always afraid it might disappear. This was solid happiness, built on a foundation of self-respect and mutual trust. As Thomas walked her to her car, Natasha's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert about Robert's latest parole hearing being denied. He would remain in prison for at least another 3 years before he could apply again. She deleted the notification without reading the full article. Robert was her past. Thomas, her business, her friendship with Helen, her plans for expansion, these were her future. And for the first time in her adult life, her future belonged entirely to her. 5 years after Robert's conviction, Natasha stood at the altar of a small chapel overlooking the mountains outside Charlotte, wearing a simple white dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Helen sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Angela and the other employees of Coleman Consulting filled the rest of the small space. Thomas waited for her at the altar, looking handsome in a dark blue suit and wearing the expression of a man who couldn't quite believe his good fortune. They had written their own vows, and when it was Natasha's turn to speak, she looked directly into his eyes. "Thomas, you came into my life when I was learning how to trust again. You showed me that love doesn't have to be complicated or painful or dangerous. You showed me that the right person will celebrate your strength instead of trying to diminish it." She paused, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. "I promise to share my life with you without losing myself in you. I promise to build something beautiful with you while keeping the independence I fought so hard to achieve. And I promise to love you with the wisdom of someone who knows the difference between love and possession." Thomas's vows were simpler but no less meaningful. He promised to support her dreams, to respect her independence, and to never take for granted the trust she was placing in him. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in applause. But Natasha barely heard them. She was thinking about how different this wedding was from her first one, when she had been young and naive and believed that love meant giving up pieces of yourself for someone else. This time, she was marrying as a complete person who had chosen to share her life, not someone looking for another person to complete her. The reception was held at a small restaurant that Thomas had rented for the evening. Coleman Consulting had grown to 3 offices, now the original location, the Charlotte branch, and a new office in Atlanta that specialized in helping women entrepreneurs secure funding for their businesses. "I'm so proud of you," Helen said as they danced together during the mother-son dance. Helen had insisted on taking that role, since Natasha's own mother had passed away the previous year. "Thank you for everything," Natasha replied. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you know. You always were." Later that evening, as the reception wound down, Natasha stepped outside for some fresh air. Thomas found her on the restaurant's patio, looking up at the stars. "Any regrets?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "About marrying you?" "Never." "About anything?" Natasha thought about it. "I regret that it took me so long to realize my own worth. I regret that I wasted 12 years on someone who never deserved me. But I don't regret the journey that brought me here. Even the bad parts? Especially the bad parts. They taught me who I really am." 3 months later, Natasha received a letter that she had been expecting for years. Robert was being released from prison early due to overcrowding and good behavior. He had served 8 years of his 20-year sentence and would be on parole for the rest of his term. She read the letter once, then threw it away. Robert's release didn't change anything about her life. He was a stranger to her now, someone from a past that felt like it belonged to a different person entirely. Thomas found the letter in the trash that evening when he was taking out the garbage. "Are you okay?" he asked, holding up the crumpled paper. "I'm fine. Better than fine. He can't hurt me anymore. Do you think he'll try to contact you?" "Maybe. But it doesn't matter. The woman he tried to kill doesn't exist anymore." And it was true. The Natasha who had nearly drunk poison whiskey on her 35th birthday had been someone who deferred to her husband's judgment, who ignored her instincts, who believed that keeping peace was more important than protecting herself. This Natasha, the one who owned 3 successful businesses, who had testified in court against the man who tried to murder her, who had built a new life entirely on her own terms, was someone Robert had never met. 2 weeks after Robert's release, he did try to contact her. He sent a letter to her old address, which was forwarded to her new home in Charlotte. The letter was full of apologies and excuses, claiming that he had found religion in prison and wanted to make amends. "I know I made mistakes," he wrote. "I know I hurt you. But I've changed. I'm not the same man who made those terrible decisions. I hope someday you can forgive me." Natasha showed the letter to Thomas, then burned it in their fireplace. "Forgiveness is for people who acknowledge what they've done wrong," she told him as they watched the paper turn to ash. "Robert still thinks what he did was a mistake instead of a choice. He still thinks he deserves something from me. What if he keeps trying to contact you? Then I'll get a restraining order. But I don't think he will. Robert is a coward who preys on people he thinks are weak. I'm not weak anymore." She was right. They never heard from Robert again. A year later, Natasha was featured on the cover of a national business magazine as one of the top female entrepreneurs under 40. The article talked about Coleman Consulting's rapid growth and innovative approach to helping women-owned businesses succeed. But the part of the article that Natasha was most proud of was the section about her personal story. She had been open about Robert's attempt to murder her, about how she had used her survival and the aftermath to build something meaningful. "Too many women think they have to choose between success and safety," she was quoted as saying. "But real success means building something that no one can take away from you. It means being strong enough to walk away from anyone who doesn't value you properly." The article generated hundreds of emails from women around the country who wanted to share their own stories of survival and rebuilding. Many of them became clients. Others became friends. Some became mentors and advisors who helped Natasha continue growing her business. Helen framed the magazine cover and hung it in her living room, where she could show it to anyone who visited. "That's my daughter-in-law," she would say proudly. "She's the strongest woman I know." On the 5th anniversary of Robert's conviction, Natasha and Thomas took a vacation to Europe. They spent 2 weeks traveling through Italy, eating amazing food and touring ancient cities and talking about their plans for the future. "Do you think you'll ever write a book about everything that happened?" Thomas asked one evening as they sat at a cafe in Rome, watching people walk by in the golden light of sunset. "Maybe someday. But not as a victim story. As a survivor's guide." "What would you tell other women in similar situations?" Natasha thought about it. "I'd tell them to trust their instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I'd tell them that they're stronger than they think they are, and that it's never too late to start over." "Anything else?" "I'd tell them that the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building a life so good that their absence from it becomes a blessing instead of a loss." That night, in their hotel room overlooking the Colosseum, Natasha started writing. Not a book, but a blog post for the Coleman Consulting website. She wrote about survival and strength, about the difference between forgiving and forgetting, about the importance of building something that belonged entirely to you. The post went viral within days, shared thousands of times by women who saw their own struggles reflected in Natasha's words. It led to speaking engagements, interviews, and eventually, a book deal with a major publisher. But more importantly, it led to connections with other survivors who were building their own new lives from the ashes of their old ones. 10 years after Robert's conviction, Natasha stood in front of a packed auditorium at a women's business conference, delivering the keynote address about resilience and reinvention. In the audience, she could see women of all ages taking notes, nodding along with her words, finding inspiration in her story. "The man who tried to kill me thought he was taking away my future," she told them. "Instead, he gave me the motivation to build a future he could never have imagined. He thought he was ending my story. Instead, he helped me write the best chapters yet." After her speech, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "My husband has been stealing money from our joint accounts," the woman said quietly. "I found out last week and I've been too scared to confront him. But listening to you, I think I need to stop being scared and start being smart." Natasha handed her a business card for a lawyer she trusted, along with her own contact information. "Being smart means protecting yourself first," she told the young woman. "Everything else can be figured out later." That night, as she and Thomas flew home to Charlotte, Natasha reflected on how far she had come from the woman who had almost drunk poisoned whiskey on her birthday. That woman had been afraid to rock the boat, afraid to question her husband's motives, afraid to trust her own judgment. This woman had built a multi-million-dollar business, helped hundreds of other women achieve their dreams, and created a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. Robert had tried to steal her life, but instead, he had forced her to claim it completely. And as their plane descended toward the lights of Charlotte, where their home and their life and their future waited for them, Natasha knew that she had won the only victory that really mattered, the right to define her own happiness. The poisoned gift that was meant to end her story had instead become the beginning of the best chapter yet.